welcome everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, Paul. You know, today we have a most interesting and insightful show. Our uniquely special guest is Sidney, Miss World 1964. Her new book, Surviving Miss World, is a searingly honest account of how winning the 1964 Miss World beauty pageant radically altered the scope of her life. Anne was born to a working-class family in England, and at barely 20, she won overnight fame by winning the Miss World pageant. And that revealed a time that was revealed during a time of the swinging 60s. And few of us could ever dream of Anne's lifestyle. Her win, by the way, led her to Bob Hope inviting her to join his USO tour, entertaining our troops in Korea, Guam, the Philippines, Vietnam during the war. Now, in our time together today, Sidney and I will discuss the impact of winning Miss World in a time when winning a worldwide beauty pageant was a very, very big deal. In addition to life in the 60s, we will discuss gender roles in that time period compared to what we believe today. Our conversation I'm looking forward to is fun and enlightening, and with that, let's bring Anne on the show. Sidney, welcome to the next chapter with Charlie.
Thank you very much, Charlie. It's lovely to be speaking to you all.
Thank you. You know, Anne, you know where I thought we might start is in 2022, beauty pageants don't hold the same prestige that they did in the 60s. And, I mean, when you were Miss World, you were a rock star. Fame was incredible and first class all the way. Tell us a bit about that time. You know, what winning Miss World meant in the 1960s.
Well, in the 1960s, you know, we didn't have any. I mean, we had in England 3 channels. I think we had, or 2 channels possibly, BBC and BBC Two or ITV. And so obviously when I won, you can imagine how long ago it was when I say it was black and white television. So in that era, you know, we were just coming into our own in lots of ways. We'd come through the war, my parents had, and I was born.
Well, that's World War II. People need to know that, yeah. And in the beginning of Vietnam War.
And yes, and of course, life was very different for my parents because when they were in their 20s, just in their prime, war with Hitler obviously started, and their lives completely were taken aback. You know, what were they going to do? What were the opportunities? And of course, we were all bankrupt at the end of the war, so only too grateful that Hitler didn't win and that we could live our lives out. But when I look at it, it was a very different period of time. And the fact that these contests were always held in the South Coast and all the Blackpool and all the summer seasons of where in those days we had summer seasons of the variety shows, all the performers in England would be on the Pier theatres and the many, many theatres all across the United Kingdom. And the people couldn't afford to go overseas. They didn't go overseas. They weren't used to it. They were happy to go to Blackpool. And in these summer resorts, the bathing bell contests were very, very famous. And of course,
no, wait a minute. What did you call them?
Bathing bell?
Bathing bells, like bathing beauties.
Bathing bells. I have never heard that term. That's a new term for me.
Well, it's just, you know, the bathing bells. I mean, because we were swimming in the ocean in the summer, we were in the baths. We had a lot of summer baths in England where they would be open to the environment, and of course they were massive. And so these contests were very, very big. And of course, you're looking at such I mean, for instance, all the stars at the time would always be the judges in the summer seasons. So it was a way, an opportunity for a girl to enter a contest and you know, just enjoy themselves and have fun. And we were all very good friends, although I wasn't in the circuit. But there was a big circuit of contests all over England. And don't forget, it really came out, Charlie, from the 40s of the beautiful American. What we saw in England was the Betty Grables, the Rita Hayworths, the glamorous. Everything was about bathing beauties, or beautiful women. And I think after the war, the 50s, and then it started in about 53 for the Festival of Britain, and we wanted to see beauty again. We wanted to see, beautiful women, lovely things, and we were starting to finally. The younger generation had a few pennies in their pocket, as opposed to what happened to my parents during World War II. And we were starting to enjoy life. And it wasn't taken seriously, to be honest, but it was a massive contest. The Miss World started first in England, and it became such a big success. And
now, you were Miss UK before you were Miss World, right?
Right. And then the Miss Universe was followed afterwards. So the Miss World was the original, very large contest in England. It was like a reality show of today. It was a chance for a girl from all over the world to meet and greet and get to know people from other countries. And don't forget, at that point, we didn't travel like that. Most countries, if you had somebody from Korea or Vietnam, not necessarily Vietnam, but whatever country it was, even New Zealand and Australia, they weren't used to getting on aeroplanes like we are today,
right, and
traveling and seeing the world. It was quite an extraordinary thing. And also, too, at the time, debutantes were what I grew up with in England. I got a free modelling course in London, and we had to put books on our head and walk.
Oh, did you? Just like in the movies, it was real?
Yes, and behave like ladies,
Behave like ladies with books on your head.
Well, we had to walk with books on our heads.
Of course.
Deportment. And, always wear gloves and, just be ladies. And, of course, because the debutantes were in, all the debutante balls and everything, we all had this dream of, for one brief moment, to be the belle of the ball. And so, of course, the contests were very well done. We had a whole 10 days of going to every event imaginable. We went to the Houses of Parliament where the MPs spoke. We went to Woburn Abbey, and they had a big party where everyone attended it, and everyone was there. It was a real event at that point. So it was the first sort of reality show where a young kid from nowhere could have an opportunity to meet people from around the world and have friendships. And then, whoever the lucky winner was able to travel the world in first-class luxury like I was. It was a big change for me because I literally when I left school, I was a hairdresser. So I started off hairdressing at 30 shillings a week, which is £1.30p. So you're looking at, and I gave my mum £1, and I had 30 shillings left to take the bus fare to work. And after that, suddenly, within a very brief matter of time, I'd enter the Miss United Kingdom because I just decided I would go up and enter. And that was in September. And by November, I was Miss World.
You're kidding. And you were not even in the group of people that had been doing this for a couple of years.
No,
you were just doing it for a couple of months, and you won the award.
Well, I was, but I'd entered when I first started hairdressing, which is in my book. The manageress of the salon, because I had to do a 3-year apprenticeship. Back in those days, that was how it was. I don't know what they do today, but that was how it was then. So the manager said, let's get some publicity for Otis Salon, which is right in the centre of Bournemouth in England, in the south coast. And the Bournemouth Regatta Queen was held in the Bournemouth Gardens, and all the lovely, local lasses entered this contest to be the Bournemouth Regatta Queen. And it was held in the gardens on a beautiful afternoon, and everybody was in their deck chairs, and the girls were sort of walking around their flower beds in their, I was in a dress that suspiciously looked like my mum's tablecloth, a blue and white gingham dress, and a big petticoat that my Auntie Hilda had made for me. And my stilettos were, going in, digging into the grass, and I was losing my shoes.
Oh, my.
It was all a bit of a joke, it was a bit of a laugh. And the audience loved it, and they laughed, and you'd have a bandstand with an orchestra playing up there in the local gardens. And it was just just society enjoying themselves and looking at pretty girls who maybe had a chance of being the local beauty queen, the Bournemouth Regatta queen. And so, of course, I entered it, and I won. And that was I was only 15 and a half, close to 16. And so the publicity for the salon, I was on the front page of the local Echo and things like that. So I think what happened was, it sort of was in my mind after that, because they sent me, the car, the mayor sent me the car, and I go to special events in my hometown. And so it just was different times. When you look back at it, it's sort of a caricature of a sweet period of life, of times. And the audience, by the way, it was judged by what they called a clapometer. The young lady who got the largest applause.
So it wasn't by vote, it was by applause. The decision wasn't by vote of the judges, it was by applause of the audience.
Audience applause.
Now, during this time, you know what I want to talk about too is during this time, this happened in 1964, and London was quite the place in the world in the 60s in those days, was it not?
Oh, it was so exciting. I mean, it really was, whether you won a beauty contest or not. London was the iconic city of the world, and you had the Beatles just coming to fame. You had fashion out of Carnaby Street. You had Twiggy and her
Twiggy, yeah.
It was just a marvelous period of my life, and anyone who's my age group would, and I'm sure the same thing happened in America in lots of ways, because the Beatles came over here and they were massive. I mean, music seemed to be out of London. All the pop stars seemed to be out. Of course, you had the Beach Boys. You had a lot of very, very fabulous groups from here as well. But it was just a time of hope, I think. We'd all come through a difficult period, even though I was born, in 1945, and the war ended then. So it was a time when we were just beginning to get our feet again and saying life is exciting. There's full of hope. There's lots of things we can do with our lives, and I think America was the same. There was a great community spirit also after the war, that we all looked after each other. I mean, it really was a time when we were all in it together.
Yeah, it was very interesting. I think you and I had talked about earlier, now, I know in the United States, I can't say about the United Kingdom, but I assume it was similar. But in the United States, because I was a child of the 60s as well, I feel, I was raised in the 50s, in my early childhood, that I lived through what I'm now looking back at as the golden era of the United States. Now, it may have been of UK, I'm not sure. But, this is where we, democracy, community, people caring for each other, trust. We didn't lock doors, and
integrity. Integrity.
Yes.
I was brought up, my parents, they were very present, emotionally with me, which is wonderful. But that word was used a lot, have integrity in everything you do.
Yeah, and but at the same time now, and I was one of them. You had your rebels, that.
Oh gosh, yes.
and that was the so-called hippie class, and we were trying to find independence during that time, and it made for quite a fascinating period of time. It may be one of our most fascinating decades,
yes, because the
ever.
pendulum always swings, doesn't it?
Yes.
Our parents have gone through a war and austerity and difficulties, and after the war, rationing. And suddenly, as I said, the pendulum swung, and then the younger kids also, which you always go through that period, they wanted to find independence and be free-spirited and join the hippies and go to Haight-Ashbury. I remember going to San Francisco and all those wonderful songs, if you're going to San Francisco, all that period, the music, everything, when you listen to the music, and it just cheers you up so much.
It was a great time, and really, and music was huge. it grew even bigger, and music has always been big, but music in the 60s and and thereafter has been huge.
And you talk about sort of independence and the hippies and kids, I remember when Elvis was popular in England, and our local cinema, and don't forget, for us to go to the cinema was quite a big deal. Our local cinema had the Jailhouse Rock on, and my dad said, "Oh, you're not going alone, I'm coming with you." The kids all in that Jailhouse Rock, I think they tore up the cinema. It just was because, Elvis was just phenomenal. And seeing all this sort of this vibrant, alive state of being, I think, and the kids they just felt that everything was ahead for them, that they had so much opportunity. But of course, we had teddy boys in England. Did you have teddy boys here?
No, I don't know what they are.
Well, teddy boys were boys that were naughty, went and did naughty things and such. But they also, would dress like Elvis and grease their hair back and do the whole bit of Elvis. And in other words, teddy boys always wear tight jeans and leather jackets.
Oh, okay, yeah. That was sort of the 50s here and early 60s, and then by the mid 60s it had changed.
Yeah. But America, it was the golden years, and I think it was in the golden years for certainly after the war, World War II in England for us, because there was opportunity. You felt there was opportunity. And another thing was, didn't matter what job you had, you would always find another job. Even if you didn't have the greatest education in the world, which I certainly didn't, I didn't focus at school. I just wanted to get out ice skating because I was creative, and I'd taken my bronze and silver medal. And every day they gave me extra time from school, and I would catch a bus down to the ice rink. Yeah. So I had this, creative attitude towards my life. I guess I always wanted to be around some form of show business, and luckily enough, I've been lucky enough to survive in it for.
Yeah, and I wanted to sort of move over to that area because I'm very curious. You went from Miss World to becoming an actress and being in TVs and movies and theater. You told me you had the lead in Sound of Music, and that's amazing. How did that transition work? How did that come about?
Well, I think I went sort of as foolishly into it as I did as a beauty contest, because I didn't think things through particularly. I just, being an Aries, I just stepped right in and gave it a shot. I always wanted to act. I always wanted to go to drama school when I was young. And my mother's father was a musical conductor, and during the war he was with what they call Pierrot groups, who, dressed with those clowns, sort of Pierrot clown groups, and he was a musician, and he toured and, conducted Lilac Time and a lot of different musicals through England. And, of course, it was a tough life. And the marriage, there was a separation because of it. This is my grandmother, and my grandfather that I didn't know. So my mother was very anti anything to do with show business because she knew it was a tough life. And it is. You go from job to job. You're not, unless you're very successful,
right.
You have to look for the next job most of the time. And so because I suppose the Miss World was a tremendous stepping stone for me, and my first show business experience was actually working with Bob Hope, coming here and having a limousine meet me and drive me to the hotel where I was staying, and then to Bob's home where he had a piano player and rehearsing the keys. And I was so terrified. I thought, gosh, now they know I'm not going to sing like Doris Day. I'll be sent back home immediately.
And you were not a singer at that time, right? You could carry a tune, but you were not a professional singer.
Precisely. I'd done pantomimes in England, which is an acted out fairy tale of Robin Hood, Cinderella, but it's really there's no fourth wall. You talk to the audience, you get them involved, and you get them cheering for the goodie and booing the baddie and that sort of stuff. And so I'd done that as a kid dancing in a dance group in my local hometown. But as I say, I really had no experience at all. And there I was suddenly, stood with Bob Hope in Toluca Lake here in his home, having to rehearse songs. And the beautiful Jill St. John walks in, and Janice Page, and they're all saying, hello, Ducky. They all called me Ducky the whole tour. And it was just phenomenal that, that they embraced me, and I learned a great deal. Like everything, nothing succeeds like success, does it?
Isn't that the truth? It breeds on itself.
Yeah. And so because I was taken into that environment and rehearsing at CBS and then performing to 5,000 troops, in most of the places we went to in the Clark Air Base or all the bases that we worked. And of course, we were flown by General Westmoreland's private plane to the smaller places where we couldn't take the band, Les Brown's Band of Renown in. We'd have to take just a guitar player. It's just when I look at it, and when I even talk about it now, I look back and go, well, did that really happen, or is it a dream? Because for a little girl that came out, and was a hairdresser, and then suddenly entered a contest, and overnight had this experience, and in a month, I'm entertaining troops with Bob Hope. So it was quite a journey. And when I started writing, my dad has said to me always, keep notes of what you do, Anne. Just wherever you go and whatever happens, just keep notes. And so for years I did. I look back and I'd throw them in a trunk somewhere or in a suitcase, and I think one day I'll look back on that. And I never really did, because I kept working for a lot of years. And then eventually, of course, I decided, my husband at the time was very sick, and I was a carer for more or less 8 years for him. And I decided to sort of take a look at it, and just to keep my brain working, to go back over my life and sort of make sense of it all, really, in a way, and write. It isn't a case of thinking a book is going to sell. I think we all, have a book in us, and we all have a story in us. And so it was very good for me to sort of go back over it.
And so you did write this book that I think we mentioned in the intro. We were supposed to, if we mentioned in the intro. Maybe I'm thinking I neglect. No. I did talk about your new book. I love the title, Surviving Miss World, and part of it was it not an attempt to better understand yourself and
oh, totally.
And tell me about that. What were you trying to understand about yourself?
Well, I think, because I had all this success, and, you don't learn a lot with success, I don't think. Pain teaches you a lot more than success does. And also emotionally, if I look back, I was making poor choices in my private life. Because I'd had so much independence, I had a hard time adapting and adjusting to the gender-specific roles and rules that I've been brought up with, but they were ingrained in me. That you aren't complete without a partner, that you aren't complete unless you have a family, or you're not, your job is to be a housewife and to do the right thing by your husband. And it's very easy to choose needy people and controlling people.
You mean as partners for you, that you would get needy and controlling people? Yes,
and I think what made me start to write, apart from the fact that my career has sort of come to a halt, and also I was being a 24/7 carer for my husband who was very ill, I felt sort of a little bit trapped, and I felt that perhaps I'd done this a lot to myself, but when you're in a duty-bound situation, which is not a bad thing, I'm a great believer. I'm a giver. I'm a big giver, and if you're a giver, unfortunately, the takers find you. But I did choose very needy men, and I was questioning why. During this process, I had no concept of how I was going to write this book, and I thought, you're not a writer. You're just a kid from nowhere. Just start at the beginning, and don't try to be clever. And just don't judge it, and just write it. And so by doing it, it took me on a journey about my life and about the decisions I'd made, and about how I kept reenacting a cycle that I realized wasn't really healthy for me. And I was trying to figure out where it was coming from. So I think a lot of us, as your show is about, we're on a journey of discovery of what really makes us happy. And having success and money isn't necessarily, it can become a sickness.
Yeah. It is not the answer. It can help, but it can also do damage. I mean, it can take us the wrong direction. Was your view, I'm curious, so you sounded like a very early aware woman. Now, I don't necessarily want to use the word feminist, because that was long before or long afterward, but you were questioning the roles of gender. Did you find yourself in a minority questioning that, or were there a lot of women feeling the same way as you?
I didn't question it growing up because what I perceived and what I saw was, my mother doing everything. My father came back from the war. He had rheumatic fever during the war in the ditches in Arnhem, and of course he was misdiagnosed, and so he wasn't well and died at 57. And my mother was really the strong one, but she was doing everything. She was, again, it's about I didn't know when I was younger, because what you see and what you perceive, you think is normal. You think that's the way you've got to be, because your role is to do this within the family. And you don't step out of that role, and therefore you sacrifice. Women are meant to sacrifice a lot of their lives, and the trouble is about that. When you then sacrifice and choose a needy man, you get suffocated, and you start to realize that you become resentful.
Right.
This is
right.
Really, and so when I was writing all through it, I started to look back and say, where did this come from? Where did my behavior come from, and what unhappiness did it bring me? And I thought that's why, in a way, there's got to be a purpose to a book. And in a way, my book is about, you enter a contest, you have all this success, and for young girls who want to be top models or anything that, you have ambition, there's nothing wrong with that at all. But I think it's to say to them, don't do what I did. Just step back. I think the girls today are brought up very differently, because most families today, both partners work. The mother, has to go out to work as well.
Right.
And
especially in California.
I hope they're brought up differently in the sense of gender-specific roles. But I know there was a lot in my build-up is you weren't complete unless you had a partner. And I think unless you complete yourself first, you cannot really have a good relationship.
I love that topic, and the topic is that you must deal with yourself first before you can contribute to a family or a community. And if you always put yourself down, or if you always look at yourself as less than, you're not going to be able to bring your best self to the table.
Absolutely. And ironically, even though I'd won a Miss World contest, I always felt a bit embarrassed about it. It's like, it's going to stay with me until I pop my clogs. Oh, she was a former Miss World, and you're walking down the street 80 years old with a cane, So you're always going to have a beauty title unless you change your name and try and leave it behind. But nevertheless, somebody finds out. And there's sort of a certain amount of embarrassment in me about it, because it's shallow, and people think that you've got to be shallow, because in today's environment, and rightfully so, we've shifted so far away from just beauty. In fact, a girl who was a hairdresser certainly wouldn't win a Miss World contest today. They're all doctors and educated, enormously educated, and have great goals, because that's the whole point of a stepping stone. And the Miss World, the contests don't want your regular office staff girl. They want somebody who's got goals and ambition and drive and had a great education. So because really and truthfully, it is absurd to choose one woman more beautiful over another woman. I mean, it's absurd. But, one day you get lucky, one day you don't. And I think with those contests, especially when I first entered them in Blackpool, all those girls knew that one day you were first, next day you were second, next day you might be third, because with a different panel of judges, they're going to choose somebody else.
Yeah.
So you might shine on the day and you might not, and somebody might like a brunette and somebody might like a blonde. And when you have 10 judges or 15 judges on a Miss World panel, you're not going to get everyone voting first, second, and third the same. So sometimes they do the skating system, and I have to go down to the third or fourth. I know I had a third placing more than Miss Argentina, who was gorgeous. But no, getting back to it, it's sort of embarrassing today, because beauty contests, they're just not the same. And
they're not the same, but I would encourage you not to be embarrassed, because they were a thing of the time, and they were something to succeed in. And I would certainly encourage you not to be embarrassed by your success, but to be very proud of it and say, today you would use these gifts and talents in another way. because you were gifted
Yes,
and talented. You would use them in another way that you would be proud of, but who knows, 30 years from now you could say, I was wrong then too. It just, the past, we have such great insight. You know what I want to do? I want to pursue this a little bit because I've got a couple of personal stories, but before I do that, it's time for us to take a break, Ann, and so it will be just very brief, and hang in, and I'll be right back.
Okie dokie.
Hi there, this is Charlie Hedges, and you are listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie. And I called it uniquely special guest. I'm so honored to have Ann Sidney, who was Miss World, and Miss World preceded Miss Universe, so this was like the biggest beauty pageant contest or biggest beauty pageant you could enter in the 60s, and she was a very famous person as a result of that. And winning that caused her to reevaluate gender roles, her role in society, how she could best be the best Anne that she wanted to be, that could contribute to the world. And I wanted to tell you that the gender biases of the 50s and 60s especially, at the time when this was the time, in the 60s when the hit TV show was Father Knows Best. So try to name a TV show that today, and it's going to be a comedy or a satire. It is certainly not
Rude and crude.
Yeah, rude and crude. It's not going to be, it's one of those cartoon shows. That was the thought of the day. It was so patriarchal. And I was fortunate because I'm just barely your junior. I'm almost the same age as you. I lived in a matriarchal family. My father was not put down or denigrated by any means, but my mom, you just knew her will was going to win. And we did, for interest, Ann, we all did the same. There were no, in our home, and I was an only child. I was adopted. I was an only child. There were no male roles or female roles. Everybody dusted the house. Everybody vacuumed. Everybody cleaned the kitchen. And then everybody went out and did yard work. My mom was out. The men were in the house, and the mom was outside at the same time. There were no gender-oriented roles in our home. And so that made, when the transition came to women's empowerment, it was not a difficult transition. It was a transition for me, but it wasn't difficult because I was raised in that kind of community. So it was very helpful for me.
Enormous equality in that home.
Oh, very egalitarian. Yeah, very, very egalitarian. And you know what's funny? It was in the 1980s that I first became aware of gender roles and women taking control in businesses. I was working with a woman in let's see what year this would have been, probably 1982, something like that. And she was the dean of a college. Now, I don't know, it might have been the English department, but there were very few women that were deans. Most of it were males. And she would go to these conventions or conferences or gatherings, and most of the women, you know these days, Ann, most of the women dressed like men. They would dress kind of in suits and even went as far as ties and...
Power dressing.
Power dressing. Now, you know what my friend Janet Milton did, and she was the dean of this college. She decided to go to one of these conferences in a red silk dress.
Oh, wonderful.
With high-heeled red leather shoes. And she said, her comment was, Ann, I want to be a first-class woman, not a second-class man. And I think she nailed it. She was really ahead of her time. And you were part of that transition of moving from, because you were aware of these issues that most of the culture was not even aware of, and you were there far ahead of most of us.
I don't think I was aware of it years ago. I just was in that position. But of course, I didn't really have the education to realize about feminine and masculine energies within both male and female, because I worked so much. I mean, my whole life was working, but then again, if you're playing a role as an actress, you're not playing a role of a powered person unless you are playing that specific role. I think it's tougher, with women thinking they have to show a masculine side to be successful or an executive. I don't think it's necessary, and she was absolutely right. By wearing the lady in red, wearing a beautiful dress and high heels and saying, I'm a woman, but I'm successful, but I also don't have to dress and be a man, or have that power dressing consistently. And I think it's tough for men to be able to cope too, because if they're in competition with a man, they know how to cope, because they can have a fight, or they can have a punch up, or they can do something, because it's a masculine energy.
Well, there's a threat, so anytime there's a threat to power,
when they have a woman in a position of power, I don't think any of us have learned how to quite deal with that.
We're getting better. We're getting better, but we still have a ways to go.
Yes, we do. On the whole, I mean, there are the exceptions like you, because you were brought up in a egalitarian attitude of everyone, has to pull their weight, and it doesn't matter whether you're male or female, and we all contribute. I did that when I grew up also in the family, because it was tough afterwards. My mum was working, my dad was working, my dad wasn't well, and I always did the washing and the ironing, and I did, we all had what we had to do within the family cycle of things. But no, I think we're better at it now. But I think it's still the sort of the men that of my generation and my age group, and obviously you are younger than me, and I don't want to say how many years, but quite a considerable amount.
And 5 years is not a lot at our age.
I think every year you age much more after 70 than you do.
That is true. That is true. Yes.
The men that I was or attracted to me, because in retrospect, I don't think I chose. I think they chose me. Mainly probably because I was a bit of a trophy. They then wanted to change this successful, outgoing personality I had to being the mother that they had, or the person at home that they feel, was the housewife that did all the cooking and the shopping and all the work and looked after them. And I think that's the transition we've made a lot with the men in probably about 30, in their 30s, 40s, and 50s now, that they're seeing that it's very difficult, because if you have children, if the man isn't going out to work and doesn't really have a job where he can take care of the children, then women become much more responsible in that. So it's a balance. Like I've always said, you've got to have a balance between everything, really, everything in life.
Yes. Now, you said that you weren't, acutely aware of gender role differences when you were younger. Tell me, was there... You certainly you're clearer on it now. Was there an event in your life or a certain time in your life when you got the realization that says, no, I don't have to be, the 1950s wife and stay at home, and, I can do other things. What brought about that change for you?
I think it was naturally ingrained in me. Because my mother was such a strong person, and my father being ill from the war with heart trouble, I always had that strength of mind of being able to be my own individual person. But I think I was drawn back by society, by the attitudes of the sort of men that, you don't have to be in this world to realize that at this age group, especially of my age group, that most men, really want their needs met. And they want their needs met by someone who is there for them. Now, that's a difficult balance, because I think that's where my failures have been in relationships, was I wasn't really prepared to take that role on, that I still had to prove something to myself. I still wanted to work. I wanted to grow. I wanted to study. I wanted to do anything that didn't keep me suffocated in a situation where somebody was, tended to say, this is what you have to be. And I think, and I hope men today are seeing more that they have to give women the freedom of being who they are.
Well, we're certainly seeing a lot more, but we certainly have a ways to go. I was wondering, now I know you have relationships, I'm assuming, with younger women. Do you have stories or advice or sage wisdom for younger women, what they can not fall into the traps that you fell into, and to live a full life according to the way they're created and their gifts and their stature? Do you have wisdom to offer younger women?
Well, I think the whole thing that, we fight with, and I think we struggle with, is a better word, is that we all are looking for some form of security, some form of stability, and that's what marriage or relationships represented to me. And I sort of question now, why did I feel that way? Because really and truthfully, uncertainty is part of life, and change is part of life. And for instance, I'm a widow now, and regardless of anything, I'd spent all that time with my last husband, and now suddenly I'm in a complete change mode of filling my life up now without having someone in my life. So I would say to any woman is, make your own journey. Always put someone first, but also put yourself in the picture, because it's very, very easy to suddenly realize that you've given up so much of your life. And there's nothing wrong with that, because I think you've got to contribute, certainly in a marriage. Go out there, go to courses, learn all the time. Don't live your life totally for someone else, because this is what I found now, is that because my husband was so ill, I've been living my life totally for him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to list off what he had, but for 8 years, 2 open heart surgeries and of course cancer. And my entire time was taken up making sure that he was doing the right thing. He was diabetic, making sure he was going to the doctor, making sure his, medication was right, making sure he got to the doctor because he didn't want to go or something. So I suddenly sort of realized how much my own life, it's not that I regret doing it. I don't regret it for 1 second, because it was needed. But now suddenly I feel so bereft, in the sense that I now have to pick myself up again and promote and get a book out there and start doing things that I need to do for myself again. And that's a difficult step once you've getting back into things, into the swing of things, especially when you're at a certain age. So I would say the wisdom I have is grow as much as you can, take classes, take courses. I did all the Tony Robbins things. Anything you can do so that you have growth yourself, and so that you don't stand still, and don't put security as number one, because life is uncertain and change is inevitable for all of us. And I think we have to. In fact, change is good, because it forces you forward.
That's incredible insight, and security. When you take a look at the psychology of Abraham Maslow and Maslow's hierarchy of need, and the lowest hierarchy need is safety and security. That is something we are all looking for, because we fear the unknown. And
that's exactly right.
And I've always said, especially in abusive relationships, abusive marriage, is that for many of the women in that situation, because of the need for security, it turns out that a bad known is better than any unknown.
That's so true.
Because even in the bad known, I have security. I can predict it. It's predictable. I know what bad's going to be. And if I don't know that, who knows, but it could get worse out there. And so we end up leaning on security rather than leaning on
faith in yourself, and faith that change is needed.
And I love it when you said faith in yourself, because you talked to me about putting yourself, it is not wrong to put yourself first and taking care of yourself, honing your talents and skills and wisdom and emotions in order that you can serve society, your family, your community. But if you don't have a solid base in yourself, it's very difficult to do that without doing it pathologically.
That's very true. And you nailed it. You completely nailed what I was trying to say.
You know what I want to do? We're getting close to wrap up. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to spend just the next little bit on talking about your memoir. I love the title, Surviving Miss World. How did you come to write that book, and what do you want people to take away with it?
Really started because I was bored, in the sense I thought, if I don't actually do something with my brain, I'm going to go start raving mad. What's for breakfast? What's for lunch? What's for dinner? I'll go absolutely mad by looking after my husband like I did, because he was very ill for a very long time. And as much as I would like to have had more freedom, I'm glad I did it. I'm very glad that I kept him alive as long as I did. But writing the book for me was just, I never expected to really get it published or anything like that. I just thought it was just a way of actually doing something with my life while I was caring for my husband, while I was the sole carer, basically. I didn't really think at the time what I was going to use as wisdom for anybody else. But I wanted to say, in the sense of surviving a beauty contest or being labeled as a beauty queen, where does it lead you, and what are the pitfalls, in it, in the sense that so many girls are still entering contests. There's masses in England, and masses are still all over the world.
Oh, yes. It's huge all over the world.
I mean, let's face it, Halle Berry, you name it. Most of the film stars of the past have all entered a beauty contest sometime in their life, because it was just, we just did. We didn't really take it very seriously. But so I suppose gradually, as I was doing it, the journey just happened to me. And it just happened that I thought, well, why have I made these choices in my life where I've repeated a pattern? And why was the pattern of putting myself in a vulnerable situation, why did I do that? So I don't think I'm the only one. I mean, in the sense of putting a solid relationship before what I needed to do for myself. And so I suppose it is the case to say to younger women, it's all very well to start off that way and to have that enormous success, but I think it takes you years to grow and look at your own faults, your own inability to actually see what you were doing. I don't think it had anything to do with my relationships. It had to do with me. And
yes, that's very insightful.
In it is to say, you can't point the finger at somebody else, until you take personal responsibility for your choices, for your life, for surviving what you did, surviving and coming through, being a trophy, being an arm piece, which, it was very much part of my life. But what wisdom did I gain out of it? What did I learn? And I do feel I finally learned a great deal. And by writing, it was by writing that I grew. It was only by writing it that I actually went, oh my goodness, that's what I was doing.
Well, I
repeated it.
I want to encourage readers to check out your book, because not only is it filled with wisdom, but that there are many humorous and interesting and surprising twists and turns and all sorts of it. You've had a remarkable life, and Sidney, it's and you've grown so much, and I appreciate your openness and honesty to share that with us, because there's lots of people that are still stuck, and you were trying to help. I so appreciate that.
Thank you. I mean, it was a great journey to actually write. I encourage anyone to sit down and especially if you've got time on your hands and you want to create something and you can't really do much other than it's a great journey to write your story. It's for all of us. I think it's a great journey to look back and see what you did and where you went wrong. I mean, I'd lived a very existential life, even in cabaret with Vegas and with all over the world singing with another girl. It was terrific and wonderful fun. But that wasn't the time when I grew. You know, the time when I grew was when I started experiencing some pain. But I'm very honest in the book, extremely honest, and that's my nature. My mum always used to say to me, Anne, you tell people too much.
But look what it's getting you now. It's wonderful. And Sidney, I want to thank you so much for spending time with me today. That is very gracious of you.
Thank you.
And I really want to encourage our listeners to check out your new book, Surviving This World. I will have a link in the show notes, so they just press the link and they can order it right from Amazon. And
thank you very much, Charlie, for that. That's really kind of you.
Of course. And I also want to thank our listeners for tuning in to The Next Chapter with Charlie. And be sure to check us out at our website, thenextchapter.life. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.